Dave's call into the ministry opened so many amazing doors for us and really opened my eyes in big ways to how specifically God knows us, knows our needs, knows our desires, and is able to provide those. It just, I mean, I could keep you here forever telling you about those things. But one of my very favorite stories was from when the first year of ministry, I'm sorry, first year of seminary, Dave took the train down on Monday mornings and came back Wednesday nights at midnight. And it worked out great on Mondays because our great friend Stephanie worked down in Seattle. She was a manager of a big hotel down there. And she had to leave in the morning exactly when Dave needed to leave to catch the train that headed down to Portland. So every Monday, I would drive him over to Stephanie's and he would drive with her to Seattle. She'd drop him off at the train station. And then Wednesday nights at midnight, Zach and I would head to Everett to pick him up at that train depot. It was just amazing how it all worked out. But that got old really because for 3 days out of the week, Zach and I were just alone here on our little hobby farm. So when the opportunity came for him to be down there full time, we jumped at that. We decided we would rent out our little farm to some great friends of ours, Chuck and Mary, because they had a desire to see if they wanted to be farmers, and we had sheep and goats and all the things back then, and so they saw it as a big adventure. And we really just wanted to have somebody watch over everything while we were down there. So that's what we did. We went down, found an apartment, and it was a huge adjustment for us to go from, we didn't live in a big house here, but we had all kinds of space to suddenly we were living an apartment life. And it was good though. It was good. We downsized quite a bit. We put a lot of things in storage, and then we headed down and started our adventure. So I was so excited the first time we went to go tour the campus, and we had a little orientation with the deans and their wives. And one thing I will say is Western Seminary really treats their seminary students and families well. The deans' wives had gotten together and created this place that they called the warehouse. And it was a room in the bottom of the administration building. So you would go in there and walk down the stairs, and the room was not huge, but it was just filled with all sorts of things that were free to the students. And what they'd done is they had just, I don't know if they'd gone thrifting themselves or just pulled things out of their own homes, but there were clothes and shoes and little appliances and, like mugs and some little crocheted doilies and silverware if you needed that. And it was really just like our own little thrift store. I loved looking through that. But really, the contents didn't change very much. Every week or so, there was a bookcase in the corner of the warehouse. And on it, you could always find maybe a bag of split peas, maybe a couple of bags of, or cans of green beans, that sort of thing. But there wasn't a lot of change. It was pretty much consistently some dried goods and a few cans of vegetables. And then the other items, there were maybe once in a while something new would come in, but it wasn't very frequent. And honestly, by about the second or third week, I think I'd memorized the contents of that warehouse. And so I would pop in there now and then, but it just didn't change at all. So it was, or very, very little. So I didn't go down a whole lot. But anyway, during this time, it was important to me. I wanted to be Dave's cheerleader. I wanted him to see that we were excited about this new call in his life and be as supportive as we could. And I didn't want to complain about anything. I just thought whatever comes, we will overcome it together. We will find a way, you know how you do. And we really were living on very, very little. It's another story for another day because it's too long to explain, but God worked it out to where Dave was able to get his schooling paid for by the NAFTA trade agreement because he was downsized at his job. It was voluntary, but still, because there was a downsize, it all had to do with that NAFTA trade thing. Honestly, it's not that exciting to me. I just know that God worked it out to where we were able to go on unemployment and Dave's schooling was paid for. So that was kind of a miracle, really, when you think about it. But I got very good at stretching pennies, and I could squeeze 6 cents out of a nickel. Everything got stretched to the hilt. If I had half of a carrot, I was like, stone soup, we're going to make stone soup today. Read that story if you don't know what I'm talking about. But I remember around Thanksgiving, the dean had a program for the 25 poorest seminary families in the school. There was this wonderful man in the community, a butcher, who every year would put together 25 boxes of, I don't know, I think there was like 30 or 40 pounds of meat in that box. And it was unbelievable when they delivered that to us. And we got that just before Thanksgiving. I started crying because there was hamburger in there. There were two steaks in there, which we hadn't had steak in forever. And, soup bones and sausage and just all sorts of wonderful things. And as I was unpacking it, I could cry right now. I remember just crying and Zach saying, "Mom, why are you crying over this?" And I said, "Because God always provides just what we need." And so we were very grateful. Well, after Thanksgiving, Christmas came around, of course. That's how that happens every year, oddly. And all of a sudden, I was struck with this horrible realization. And it was that I had left virtually all of our Christmas things back at home. We had stored everything. I mean, I had a few little Christmassy, knick-knacky things, and I had brought our Christmas lights for the tree, and I knew we were going to be able to get a tree. But really, the bulk of it was in storage. And I was really worried about that because I don't know what it was, but especially as a young mom, I had this feeling that if I did not maintain my traditions, I was going to ruin my son. That somehow, if I did the same thing every year, it was grounding to him. It would be what carried him through his adulthood. I don't know what I thought was going to happen if we didn't do the things that we always did, but I was grieving it. And so I had kind of been squirreling away a little bit of money here and there. It was a quarter here, 10 cents there, anything I found in the laundry, of course. And I just had saved up just enough that I thought, well, maybe I can use some of this little extra money that I've been hoarding to do some of the traditions that we had done. Now, the three main things that I did every year was I baked like crazy, of course. I mean, that's what you do. And I always bought a new puzzle. And it could be any kind of puzzle, but my goal was that I would set it out on the table. And then if friends or family came by, we could just kind of sit together and work on it if somebody wanted to. And so it was just always out there on the table. And then every year, I don't know where this came from, but I bought a new instrumental CD of Christmas music. And that the only rule was that it had to be instrumental only. I mean, I had a lot of CDs that had Christmas with sound, but I was building this collection of instrumental Christmas music. And so it was kind of fun every year to try to find a new one. I mean, I had Cajun Christmas, I had Appalachian Christmas, Parisian, I mean, I had it all. And so I thought, well, I have to get a new CD this year. And I have to put out a puzzle, and I don't have any of the puzzles from back home, and I want to bake. So I went to Dave and I asked him, I said, do you think we can do this? Do you think I can do my normal baking and get a puzzle and get a CD for Christmas? And he just said, I don't see how we can do it. And I'd kind of known that was going to be the answer just because we were really on such a tight budget. But like I said, I'd had a little teacup full of some little change and stuff up in the cupboard. And I thought about it and I looked around to see what I could cook. I thought, well, if nothing else, I can make some, I'll just do something special cookie wise or make a cake or whatever. And this is weird because I knew what we had brought from home. We'd brought a few dry goods from home and then we had, supplemented at the store. But I opened the cupboard and I looked up and I saw a bag of Spanish peanuts, which was so weird because I knew I didn't bring those from home. And Dave back then, he's different now, but back then he would never go to the store and just period, unless he had to pick up something, but he would never just randomly pick up a bag of Spanish peanuts. So all by itself, that was kind of a little bit of a miracle because I don't know how those peanuts got up in the cupboard. But I looked at those and I thought, I looked in my sugar container and I saw what I had in there and I had just enough of all of that if I could get some Karo syrup, I could make Dave peanut brittle, which he loved, and I would make that every Christmas for him. So that was going to be my surprise. I thought, good, I can do this. I can make Dave peanut brittle. But I didn't have the Karo syrup, so I knew I was going to need to buy it. I counted what I had in my little teacup, all the little change I had, and I said to Dave, I need to run to the store, so I won't be long. And he said to me, good, because I need you to pick up some copy paper. And he said, I have a report or some sort of assignment was due to his professor on Friday, and we had run out of copy paper, or actually it was typing paper. And so I don't have time to explain it to you younger people. Back then we used that quite a bit. And so my heart just sunk. He said, but I have a few dollars. So I think he gave me $4 that he had. And he didn't know I had a little bit with me. I don't know what he thought I was going to shop with, but anyway. And so I got to the store, and all the way there, I thought, I'm going to buy the cheapest see-through typing paper you've ever laid your eyes on, and then I'll have left over to go toward the Karo syrup. But I need to back up. Before I walked out the door, Dave said, oh, by the way, we just finished the last of the milk. Well, I had an 8-year-old son at home, and I knew I needed to get milk. So I'm counting Dave's $4 and the change that I had in there, and I'm thinking, if I can get really cheap copy paper or typing paper, then maybe I can do this. Maybe I can still get some Karo syrup. So the first place I went was to the office supply store there, and I looked for the cheap bargain copy paper, bought it. I had a little bit left over from Dave's money. And as I was walking from there into the Safeway that was down there in Vancouver, where we were living in Vancouver, Washington, and seminary was in Portland. I passed a Hallmark store, and I looked and saw the puzzles they had in there. They had some out near the window, and I thought, oh, I know those are terribly expensive. And as I walked into the store, they had a bin of CDs there. And so I dug through and kind of looked, and they did have an instrumental one, but I knew I couldn't buy it. So I just tried to comfort myself with the thought that Zach and Dave would really love the peanut brittle. So I went back and got a small container of milk to tide us over. And then I went over to the baking aisle and went straight to the Karo syrup and looked down at the prices. And they had a big bottle and a little bottle, but the little bottle was too much with the milk that I had to get. I want to say it was like $2.97 or $2.79, and I could have bought it if I didn't have to get the milk, but I knew I wasn't leaving that store with both milk and Karo syrup. Waited around a while for some clerk to come and mark it down for me, and that didn't happen. So I went back out to the car as I was leaving. I didn't start crying until I set that container of milk on the seat next to me and started backing out of the parking lot. And I know that sounds silly. I mean, you might think, why would you cry over that? But it just felt important to me as a mom. I think, any of you moms out there, you want your family to have those little things. And so I went home and I handed Dave the typing paper and I put the milk in the fridge. And I think I went in our bedroom and cried for a little bit more. Dave had no idea why I was so upset. And I was really a crab that week. I was just morose. I really was. I was just kind of somber all the time. And Dave didn't know why I was upset. And I didn't want to tell him. I didn't want him to feel bad over it. And so I just remember that whole week being just very sad and feeling despondent. And Friday came, and Dave, the paper that he needed that typing paper for, it was time to go turn it into his professor. And he said, why don't you guys get your coat and you can come with me over to Portland when I drop this off? And I said, no, I don't want to go. You guys go. And Dave said, no, get your coat. You really need to go too. And he never puts his foot down about anything. He's just so wonderfully easygoing. But I think he just saw that I needed to get out of the house. So we got in the truck and we crossed the bridge from Vancouver over to Portland. And I'm staring out the window the whole time and just watching the rain. And we get to campus and Dave says, Zach, you come with me while I turn in my paper, and mom's going to go down to the warehouse and look around. And I said, oh, I'm not going over there. I said, there's never anything new there. And he goes, no, just go take a little walk and just, have some time to yourself. I think really he wanted a little time to himself because I hadn't been super pleasant that week, but whatever. So I remember it was Christmas break at this point. It was like 2 weeks into December, I think. And everybody was gone for the holiday, but the administration office was open because people were turning in the last of their stuff. And Dave's professor was still there. And I walked in and the building was dark, even though it was open. And I walked down the stairs and had to flip on the light to be able to do that. Walked to the door of the warehouse and pushed it open and flipped on the light. And I looked across the room, and in the corner where there was always just dried split peas, and beans and that sort of thing, and never really anything beyond that, there was one bottle of Karo syrup. And I flew across that room and grabbed that bottle and hugged it to myself and just thanked the Lord. I thought, I don't know, God, who you inspired to put exactly what I wanted, what I needed in that bookcase, but thank you so much that you did that. And I turned around and I was going to head back up to tell Dave about, this is why I've been such a brat, And as I was walking by this one table, I glanced down and there was a puzzle sitting there. Now, mind you, we can take anything we want out of there. I wasn't stealing. There were 2 identical Hallmark puzzles, shrink wrapped. I grabbed one and just stared at it, and it had a $10 sticker on it. There was no way I was ever going to pay $10 for a puzzle, but there it was. And I grabbed that and the Karo syrup, and I just couldn't believe it. I was just thanking God all the way across the room. And I went to flip off the light before I left, and there was a little tiny round table right underneath the light. And as I glanced down, you know what was there? There was one CD sitting there, and I picked it up, and it was instrumental Christmas music, and one that I didn't have. I held those three things and slid to the ground and sobbed my eyes out. I couldn't believe that God had provided the three things that were the dearest in my heart, the closest to my heart. And as I was sitting there in that room, I worshiping, really, it's like I heard the Lord. I didn't hear him with my ears, but my heart heard, "It is my delight to delight you." And I realized as I was sitting there that not one time that week had I asked God for the Karo syrup or the puzzle or the CD. I hadn't. My thoughts never once had turned to him. Um, and I love that. Let me tell you that. I love that I didn't ask him, because I wouldn't want this to be a video where I said, and you know what? I lifted up my needs to the Lord and he provided. I think it's important that everyone knows that God knows all the little desires of our hearts. And he sometimes wants to bless us even when we haven't even thought to turn to him. So that's one of my favorite aspects of this story, is that I didn't ask God. You know, something about all of that is, I remembered back when I was thinking on this on the ride home, I remembered saying to Zach in the kitchen when I was crying over the box of meat that came, when he said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "Because God gives us just what we need." And I realized how wrong that was. Sometimes it gives us just what we need, but sometimes it gives us something just because we want it. And I think because it allows him to reveal himself to us in a new and fresh way. Oh, I hope you're so aware that God is there, that he knows you, he knows your heart, he knows all the little things that makes your heart leap. He knows your dreams. It's so important that you know that. That's one of the things about this story, that I've shared this everywhere. I've shared it in many, many places in the world. And I get asked about this story probably more than any other, because it's so specific what God did. So the second part of all this is, I did go home and make the peanut brittle for Zach and Dave, and they loved it. And then I took that Karo syrup bottle when it was empty, and I washed it out, and this is it. I've kept it all these years. And the first thing I did, if you see there's all these little scrolls in there, is I wrote down this whole situation, everything that led up to it, and how God blessed me and surprised me with those things that I wanted. And I wrote it on a little scroll and put it in here. And over the years, we've added to it different times. And some of the stories I've shared on this channel are on little scrolls in this bottle. But I did it because it's important that each of us, and this is, by the way, part 4 of Renewing Your Awe. This is what I want to leave you with as we end this little series. It's so important for all of us to somehow come up with a way to have our own stones of remembrance. And if you're not familiar with that phrase, it was something that God told Joshua to do. He told him to have one member of each of the 12 tribes, after they crossed the Jordan, after God had miraculously brought him across the Jordan. He instructed Joshua to have a head of each of the tribes go out and find a large stone from the river. And then they were to take it and construct it into a structure, a pile of sorts on the side of the riverbank, to last as a memorial, so that forever their children and their grandchildren and their grandchildren's grandchildren, when they saw that pile of rocks that meant nothing to anyone else, any passerby would just see it as a mound of rocks, but they could tell the story of who God is and who he was to them at that moment, and how he provided and how he knows us. And I love the whole concept of stones of remembrance. Maybe you want to go buy a Karo syrup jar. You can do that. I would love that. But maybe you want to start journaling the things that God has done in your life, and the ways that he has been your Jehovah Jireh, your provider. Or you can find your own creative ways to do it, but somehow we must, because what happens is our memories are in these little puny brains, in these finite bodies, and age takes its toll on us, and it's so easy to forget those moments that have been so critical to us. But when we take time to somehow record them with our own stones of remembrance. However you do it, they're forever. I want to leave these stories for my grandkids. My grandkids love these stories, and they will not forget them because they've asked me over and over to repeat them. But I don't want anyone in my family to not know how important God is to me. And I would love it if my great great grandchildren knew that Grandma loved the Lord and He loved her back. Well, let me reverse that. The Lord loved Grandma, and so she learned to love Him. That's really how it goes. And I think our stories are things that we can leave as a legacy to our loved ones. So I hope that encourages you. Um, and I hope that you will do some sort of a Stones of Remembrance recording system of your own. If you do that, please come back because I would love to hear about it. God bless you, and we will talk soon.